Welcome to this channel. At the sum of 1,000 subscribers, I will post a series of special stories for you. Subscribe. Private Ethan Carrington stood on the windswept ridge of Outpost Sigma 4, staring out at the desolate, barren landscape that stretched endlessly before him. The sky was a dull gray, a permanent haze that seemed to hang over the planet like a heavy shroud. Sigma 4 had no strategic importance, no grand battles fought here, and no ancient artifacts to uncover. Just an outpost, barely worth mentioning in the grand scheme of the galaxy. It was a place where soldiers were sent to disappear, to be forgotten by the larger conflicts raging across the stars. Ethan had grown used to the monotony. Days blurred into one another, patrols through the same dry canyons, routine maintenance of outdated equipment, and the occasional skirmish with raiders or pirates bold enough to test their defenses. His life was simple, unremarkable. He was just another face in the crowd, a soldier doing his duty. But on that cold, quiet evening, as he leaned against a rusting bulkhead, something unexpected happened. His comm device, usually silent except for routine reports from his superiors, suddenly crackled to life with a burst of static. At first, Ethan thought it was just interference from the local weather patterns, another common occurrence on Sigma 4. But then, through the garbled noise, he heard a voice. It was faint, distorted by distance or perhaps damage, but unmistakably real. Repeat. Emergency. Life support failing. Need assistance. Ethan straightened, frowning at the device. The voice was alien, speaking in a language his translator struggled to fully interpret. The words were fragmented, but the desperation in the tone was clear. He quickly adjusted the frequency, trying to clean up the signal, but it remained weak and broken. The distress call was coming from somewhere far off the grid, deep in the uncharted sectors of Sigma 4. Probably just another pirate trap, Ethan muttered to himself, although something about the voice gnawed at him. Pirates often lured outposts with fake distress signals, but this sounded different. More authentic. Ethan knew the protocol non-human distress calls outside the boundaries of the outpost were to be ignored unless there was a direct threat to the base. His commanding officer, Captain Vargas, made that clear. "We're here to maintain the peace, not to play hero for every lost alien in the galaxy," Vargas had once said. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was something else. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the device. Part of him wanted to shut it off, ignore it like he was supposed to. But another part, the part that had joined the military to help those in need, couldn't let it go. What's the harm in checking it out, he thought, trying to justify his decision. If it's nothing, I'll turn back. No one has to know. With a final glance over his shoulder, ensuring no one was watching, Ethan activated his locator and set off toward the source of the signal. The coordinates led him deep into the heart of the restricted zone, a place no soldier was supposed to go without clearance. It was an area long abandoned after ancient conflicts between warring alien species had rendered it unstable. As Ethan moved deeper into the zone, the landscape began to change. The barren, rocky terrain gave way to strange, crumbling ruins, remnants of an advanced civilization long since lost to time. Towering stone structures, half buried in the dust of centuries, loomed over him, their once majestic architecture now reduced to rubble. The air grew heavier, almost oppressive, as if the planet itself was remembering the weight of the battles that had been fought here. Finally, after what felt like hours of trekking through the desolate wasteland, he saw at the wreckage of a massive spacecraft, half buried in the ground. Smoke still rose from the twisted metal, and the faint flicker of damaged lights hinted that someone was still alive inside. Ethan approached cautiously, his hand hovering over his sidearm. He had no idea what kind of alien species he was dealing with, and he couldn't afford to be reckless. But as he neared the wreckage, the distress signal became clearer. It was coming from within. Climbing over the shattered hull, Ethan slipped inside the ship, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. The interior was a maze of debris and flickering displays. It was clear that the ship had been in some kind of intense battle, judging by the scorch marks and the deep gashes in the walls. Whoever had piloted it had been in serious trouble. His flashlight beam passed over a figure slumped against the far wall of the control room. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The being was tall, humanoid, but unmistakably alien, its skin a gleaming silver, almost metallic in the dim light. Its features were sharp and angular, with large, glowing eyes that flickered weakly as Ethan approached. The alien was badly injured, its body riddled with burns and deep cuts. Its chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. Ethan knelt beside the figure, unsure of what to do. His medical training had been basic at best, and he had never dealt with an alien of this kind before. The alien's eyes flickered open, focusing on Ethan. It spoke in its native tongue, a string of guttural, melodic sounds that Ethan's translator struggled to keep up with. But one word came through clearly. Help! Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't a pirate trap. This was real. And this alien, whoever he was on the brink of death. Without thinking, Ethan pulled out his medkit and began working to stabilize the creature. The alien winced but did not resist. Slowly, its breathing steadied, though its injuries were still severe. As Ethan worked, the alien's glowing eyes fixed on him, studying him with an intensity that made him uneasy. Finally, the alien spoke again, this time through a broken, barely functioning translator on its wrist. I am Vector, it rasped. Commander of the Valterran Alliance. Ethan blinked, trying to make sense of the words. He had heard of the Valterrans, a powerful alien coalition that had once been a major player in galactic politics. But that was years ago. Rumor had it they had been wiped out by a faction known as the Xandorian Empire in a brutal war. I don't understand, Ethan said. What happened? How did you get here? Vector coughed weakly, his body trembling with the effort to speak. Betrayed. By the Xandorians. My fleet destroyed. I was the last. Trying to reach the resistance. But too late. Ethan's mind raced. He had just saved the last living leader of a once great alien alliance. This was more than he had bargained for. He looked down at Vector, who seemed to sense the human's uncertainty. Listen. Human, Vector wheezed, my people. They need you. A message. Take it to the resistance. Before Ethan could respond, Vector reached into a pouch on his chest and pulled out a small, glowing orb. His hand trembled as he held it out to Ethan. This contains everything. They will know what to do. Ethan hesitated for only a moment before taking the orb. It pulsed gently in his hand, its surface warm and alive with energy. He looked down at the dying alien, unsure of what to say. But before he could speak, Vector's eyes closed, his body finally succumbing to its injuries. Silence filled the ruined ship as Ethan stood there, the weight of what had just happened slowly sinking in. He had saved a dying alien commander, and now he held in his hand a message that could change the course of galactic history. But he was just a soldier. How could he possibly be the one to carry out this mission? As he buried Vector in the ruins outside the ship, Ethan knew there was no going back. Whatever came next, his life had just been irrevocably changed. And far above, in the cold reaches of space, Xandorian ships were already closing in on his position. Ethan stared down at the freshly dug grave, his hands still covered in dust from burying Vector's silver-skinned body. The towering ruins of the ancient civilization loomed overhead, casting long shadows across the barren land. The cool night air was thick with the weight of the moment, and his thoughts swirled like the dust at his feet. How had things spiraled so quickly? One moment he was a simple soldier, patrolling the most forgettable outpost in the galaxy. The next, he had just buried the last commander of an extinct alien alliance, carrying a mysterious orb with a message that might decide the fate of entire species. Vector's words echoed in his mind. My people. They need you. The resistance. Ethan lifted the glowing orb and examined it in the dim light. It was small but heavy, pulsing faintly with energy. He could feel a subtle warmth emanating from it, and though he couldn't understand its full significance, he sensed that it held power that others, like the Xandorian Empire, would kill to possess. Standing alone in the desolate ruins, Ethan felt the vastness of the galaxy weighing down on him. He was a soldier, not a hero. This wasn't his fight. The Valterran Alliance, the Xandorian Empire, alien politics, it was all far above his rank. But the responsibility now rested squarely on his shoulders. He'd made a promise to a dying alien, and even though he barely understood what he was getting himself into, Ethan knew he had to see it through. He tucked the orb into his jacket and began making his way back to Outpost Sigma 4. Each step felt heavier than the last, the distant stars overhead barely visible through the ever-present haze of the planet's atmosphere. His mind raced as he tried to piece together a plan. What now? How was he supposed to find a rebellion that had likely gone into hiding, scattered across galaxies? And what did Vector mean by they will know what to do? As Ethan approached the outskirts of the base, he was immediately aware of a change in the atmosphere. Sigma 4, normally quiet and dull, seemed tense. Soldiers were moving with a sense of urgency, and patrols had increased. Something was wrong. Slipping into his barracks, Ethan made his way to his small bunk and quickly concealed the orb. His heart raced as he tried to act normal, scanning the room to make sure no one had noticed his absence. But the moment he sat down, the door slid open, and in stepped Sergeant Lena Reyes. Lena had always been sharp, a no-nonsense soldier with a sixth sense for trouble. She was one of the few people Ethan trusted, but even so, her sudden arrival made his stomach tighten. "Where the hell have you been?" she demanded, crossing her arms as she stood over him. Her dark eyes searched his face for answers. "Just out on patrol," Ethan said, trying to sound casual. Lena's gaze narrowed. "Don't lie to me. Something's going on. The Xandorians have been sniffing around the planet for days, and now you disappear for hours? I've known you long enough to know when something's off." Ethan hesitated. He trusted Lena, but how could he possibly explain what had just happened without sounding insane? Still, the weight of what he was carrying, both physically and mentally, was too much for him to bear alone. Taking a deep breath, he pulled the orb out from beneath his jacket and held it up. "I found something," he said quietly. Lena's eyes widened, her skeptical expression softening into shock. "What is that?" Ethan quickly recounted the events of the past few hours, how he had intercepted the distress signal, found the dying alien commander, and received the orb with the message for the Valterran resistance. As he spoke, Lena's face shifted from disbelief to concern, her arms dropping to her sides as she absorbed the story. When he finished, she sat down heavily on the edge of the bunk, staring at the orb. "You helped an alien leader? And now you've got a device meant for a rebellion we haven't heard from in years?" She shook her head. "Ethan, do you even realize what you've done? The Xandorians have been trying to wipe out every trace of the Valterran Alliance. If they find out you're involved, dash." "I know," Ethan cut in, his voice low. "But I couldn't just leave him to die. He wasn't a threat. He was just, I don't know, desperate." Lena ran a hand through her short-cropped hair, clearly torn between her loyalty to Ethan and the cold reality of their situation. "You know how dangerous this is, right? The Xandorians don't show mercy. If they find out you're carrying that thing, they won't stop until you and anyone you've told are dead." Ethan clenched his fists, frustration building in his chest. "So what am I supposed to do? Just bury it and pretend none of this happened? I made a promise to him. He trusted me." Lena sighed and looked at the orb again. I get it. But this is bigger than us. We're not equipped to handle something like this. We're soldiers, Ethan, not spies or rebels. Silence settled between them as they both stared at the glowing orb. Outside, the sound of soldiers moving in formation echoed through the outpost, a stark reminder of the rigid order they were both bound to. But beneath that silence, something else stirred in the air, something far more dangerous. A faint vibration ran through the walls of the barracks, followed by a low rumble in the distance. Lena's head snapped toward the door. What the hell was that? Ethan was already on his feet, his instincts kicking in. I don't know, but it's not good. They rushed outside just in time to see the sky above the outpost light up with the fiery trails of descending ships, Xandorian warships, sleek and black, their engines roaring as they cut through the atmosphere. Panic spread among the soldiers as alarms blared across the base. Xandorian assault force incoming. All units, prepare for defense. Captain Vargas' voice shouted over the comms. Ethan's stomach dropped. The Xandorians had found them. They're here, Lena muttered, her face pale with realization. They know about the orb. They must have tracked it somehow. How? Ethan asked, feeling a cold sweat break out on his skin. I didn't broadcast anything. Lena grabbed his arm, her voice urgent. It doesn't matter how. What matters is that they're not here for Sigma 4. They're here for you. Panic surged through Ethan. If the Xandorians were after him, then everyone at the outpost was in danger. He glanced at Lena, who seemed to understand what he was thinking. We have to get out of here, she said quickly, her military precision taking over. If we stay, they'll tear this place apart until they find you. We need to leave now. Ethan nodded, his mind racing. Where can we go? We can't just walk out of the base with Xandorian warships above us. Lena smirked grimly. I've got an idea. Follow me. As chaos erupted around them, Ethan and Lena slipped through the fray, dodging panicked soldiers and the roaring hum of Xandorian fighter crafts overhead. Lena led them toward the far end of the outpost, where a series of small, unmarked ships were kept for emergency evacuations. They were fast, stealthy, and, more importantly, untraceable. Lena tapped a code into one of the ship's control panels, the hatch hissing open. Get in, she shouted. Ethan hesitated for a moment, looking back at the base. It was his home, his comrades were fighting to defend it, and now he was abandoning it all. But then he remembered Vector's dying words, the weight of the orb in his pocket, and the Xandorian ships descending like predators from the sky. He climbed inside, sealing the hatch behind them. As the ship powered up, Lena glanced at him from the pilot's seat. You realize this means we're fugitives now, right? Ethan forced a grim smile. Fugitives with the last hope of a galaxy in our hands. What could go wrong? With a roar, the ship shot into the sky, weaving through the chaos of the Xandorian assault. Sigma 4 disappeared beneath them, and the vastness of space stretched out ahead. Ethan stared at the stars through the viewport, the weight of his decision settling heavily on his shoulders. He had no idea where this path would lead, or what dangers lay ahead. All he knew was that his life had been changed forever. And somewhere out there, the remnants of the Valteran resistance were waiting for the message he now carried. The small stealth ship hummed quietly as it slipped through the cold void of space, far from the embattled surface of Sigma 4. Inside the cockpit, Ethan sat in the co-pilot seat, watching the distant stars blur into streaks of light as they entered hyperspace. His mind was still racing from the chaos they had just escaped, and his pulse pounded in his ears. It had all happened so fast, the Xandorian attack, the frantic escape, and the weight of the orb still sitting heavily in his jacket pocket. Beside him, Sergeant Lena Reyes expertly maneuvered the controls, her face a mask of focused determination. They had no real destination, no plan beyond getting as far away from the Xandorians as possible. But even now, with the immediate danger behind them, Ethan could feel the tension in the air, like the universe was holding its breath, waiting for the next disaster to strike. "We can't keep running forever," Lena muttered, her eyes never leaving the controls. "The Xandorians will hunt us down, no matter where we go. This ship may be fast, but they've got an entire empire at their disposal." Ethan nodded, running a hand through his hair. "I know. We need to find the resistance. Vector said they'd know what to do." Lena glanced at him sharply. "If they even still exist. The Xandorians have been wiping out the Valterran forces for years. Vector was their last commander, and now he's dead. For all we know, we're chasing ghosts." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He had thought the same thing, but there was something about Vector's last moments, something in the alien's dying plea that made him believe there was still hope, however slim. "I don't know," Ethan said quietly. "But I think we have to try. There has to be something left. Otherwise, why would the Xandorians be so desperate to stop us?" Lena sighed and leaned back in her seat. "Maybe you're right. Maybe there's still a spark of the rebellion out there somewhere. But we need more than hope, Ethan. We need a plan. And we need to figure out what that orb is really for." The orb. Ethan pulled it from his jacket and held it in his hands. It was small, fitting easily in his palm, but its surface shimmered with faint energy, like a heartbeat. He had no idea how it worked, but Vector had made it clear that this device was the key to finding the resistance. "Do you think we could access it?" Ethan asked, looking at Lena. "Maybe it has coordinates or some kind of signal that can lead us to them." Lena raised an eyebrow. "It's alien tech, Ethan. I doubt it's as simple as pressing a button. But we can try." She reached over, took the orb from him, and placed it on the control console. The ship's systems scanned it immediately, flickers of light reflecting off its surface. After a few tense moments, the ship's onboard computer beeped, displaying a string of alien characters across the screen. "Great," Lena muttered. "Now we just need to figure out what that means." Ethan frowned, his mind racing. "Is there any way we can translate it?" Lena shook her head. "Not with what we've got here. But I might know someone who can help. There's an old smuggler station about 2 jumps from here. If anyone can crack alien tech, it's them." Ethan's stomach churned at the thought of involving smugglers. They were unpredictable, and many of them were allied with the Xandorian Empire, trading in weapons and stolen tech. But right now, they had no other options. They needed to unlock the secrets of the orb before the Xandorians caught up with them. "Do we have a choice?" Ethan asked. "Not really," Lena replied with a smirk. "Buckle up. It's going to be a bumpy ride." The smuggler's station, known as Haven 7, was a far cry from the sterile military outposts Ethan was used to. Built inside the hollowed remains of a massive asteroid, it was a sprawling labyrinth of twisting corridors, dimly lit bars, and shadowy figures trading everything from illicit weapons to forbidden alien artifacts. The place reeked of grease and desperation, with barely functioning life support systems and a constant hum of malfunctioning machinery. Ethan felt out of place the moment they stepped inside, his military training screaming at him to stay alert as they wove through the crowd. He kept his hand near his sidearm, eyeing the rough-looking smugglers and bounty hunters who filled the station. Most of them gave him and Lena a wide berth, but a few curious eyes lingered on them longer than he liked. "We're looking for a guy named Merrick," Lena whispered as they navigated the cramped, winding corridors. "He's an old contact of mine. If anyone here can unlock alien tech without asking too many questions, it's him." "Let's hope he's on our side," Ethan muttered. They finally found Merrick in a dark corner of one of the station's dingiest bars. He was a thin, wiry man with sharp features and a sly grin, his greasy black hair falling into his eyes as he tinkered with a small device on the table in front of him. He didn't even look up as they approached. "Reyes," Merrick said, his voice dripping with amusement. Didn't expect to see you in a place like this. I thought you'd gone legit. I need a favor, Merrick, Lena said, sliding into the seat across from him. Merrick's eyes flicked up to her, then to Ethan, sizing him up quickly before he leaned back in his chair. Favors are expensive these days. Especially with the Xandorians cracking down on business. Lena pulled the orb from her jacket and placed it on the table between them. Can you crack this? Merrick's eyes widened, and for the first time, his smug grin faltered. He reached out hesitantly, his fingers brushing the surface of the orb as if it were a dangerous animal. This is Valteran tech. Where the hell did you get this? Ethan and Lena exchanged a glance. They hadn't told Merrick anything about the circumstances that had led them here, and they didn't intend to. Can you unlock it or not? Lena asked, her tone firm. Merrick leaned in, his eyes glittering with greed. Oh, I can unlock it. But it's going to cost you. This kind of tech is worth more than both of your lives combined. I'll need something extra. Lena scowled, but before she could respond, the door to the bar slid open, and Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Several figures clad in black armor entered the room, their helmets marked with the emblem of the Xandorian Empire. They moved with military precision, scanning the room as they went. We don't have time for this, Merrick, Ethan whispered urgently. The Xandorians are here. We need that orb unlocked now. Merrick glanced nervously at the armored soldiers, then back at Ethan and Lena. Fine, he muttered, grabbing the orb and his tools. But you owe me for this. He worked quickly, his fingers flying over the alien device with a practiced ease that suggested he'd dealt with Valteran tech before. Ethan kept his eyes on the Xandorian soldiers, who were now questioning the bartender at the far end of the room. Time was running out. Finally, Merrick leaned back, a triumphant grin spreading across his face as the orb clicked open, revealing a holographic map of the galaxy. Red markers dotted several locations across the star systems, each one pulsing with a faint glow. These, Merrick said, tapping one of the markers, are Valteran resistance cells. Scattered, but still active. You find one of these, and you'll find the people you're looking for. Ethan barely had time to register the information before one of the Xandorian soldiers turned toward them. Their eyes locked for a split second, and the soldier's hand shot to his blaster. They've spotted us, Lena hissed, pulling Ethan to his feet. The bar erupted into chaos as the Xandorian soldiers opened fire, blaster bolts scorching the air. Ethan ducked behind the table, returning fire as they made a break for the exit. Merrick had already disappeared into the shadows, taking whatever payment he deemed necessary with him. Lena grabbed the orb and stuffed it into her jacket as they sprinted down the station's corridors, dodging panicked smugglers and bounty hunters as they went. The Xandorians were hot on their heels, shouting commands as more soldiers joined the chase. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. They had what they came for, the location of the resistance, but now they were trapped in the middle of a hostile station, with nowhere to run. This way! Lena shouted, leading them toward the docking bay. As they rounded the corner, a blast shook the station, throwing them off their feet. Ethan looked up to see the Xandorian ships outside, opening fire on the asteroid. The walls groaned, the metal structure beginning to collapse under the assault. We've got to get to the ship! Ethan yelled over the noise. They scrambled to their feet, dodging falling debris and the relentless fire of the Xandorian troops. The docking bay was just ahead, and through the thick glass viewport, Ethan could see their ship waiting, undamaged for now. But as they reached the final corridor, a towering Xandorian officer stepped into their path, his eyes cold and unflinching. He raised his weapon, aiming directly at Ethan's chest. Ethan froze, his mind going blank. There was no cover, no escape. It was over. But before the Xandorian could fire, a blur of movement caught Ethan's eye. Lena dove forward, knocking the soldier's weapon aside and sending the blaster shot wide. They struggled for a moment, Lena wrestling the officer to the ground, but the Xandorian was too strong. He pinned her down, his hand closing around her throat. Ethan didn't think. He raised his blaster and fired, the shot hitting the officer squarely in the chest. The Xandorian collapsed, lifeless, as Lena gasped for breath. "Let's go!" Ethan shouted, pulling her to her feet. They stumbled into the docking bay, sealing the hatch behind them just as the station began to collapse. Their ship roared to life, lifting off as the asteroid station crumbled into dust behind them. Ethan collapsed into the co-pilot seat, his heart still racing. That was close. Lena nodded, rubbing her neck. Too close. As they left Haven 7 behind, the weight of their situation began to settle on them. They had the locations of the Valterran resistance, but the Xandorians were closer than ever, and now they knew exactly what Ethan and Lena were after. The rebellion had begun. And there was no turning back. The cockpit of the stealth ship was quiet, save for the hum of the engines as they streaked through hyperspace. The holographic map from the orb floated above the console, casting a faint blue glow over Ethan and Lena. The red markers that indicated resistance cells blinked steadily, scattered across the galaxy like fragile embers waiting to be ignited. Ethan's mind whirled as he stared at the map. They had escaped Haven 7 by the skin of their teeth, and now they were fugitives, hunted by one of the most ruthless regimes in the galaxy. But more than that, they were carrying the last hope of the Valterran Alliance, the remnants of a rebellion that had been all but crushed by the Xandorian Empire. "We're not out of this yet," Lena said, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm but tense, her eyes locked on the map. "We have the locations of the resistance cells, but we don't know how many are still active. And with the Xandorians hunting us, it's only a matter of time before they catch up again." Ethan nodded, still processing the gravity of their situation. "We have to start somewhere. Vector wouldn't have given us this if there wasn't a chance. Maybe we can find one of the larger cells and convince them to regroup." Lena glanced at him. "Convince them to regroup? Ethan, you're talking about leading a rebellion against the Xandorian Empire. Do you realize what that means? We're 2 soldiers, and they have fleets of warships, armies. We'll be lucky to make it to the next planet alive." Ethan didn't have an answer. He knew how impossible it sounded. But what choice did they have? They couldn't keep running, and they couldn't ignore what Vector had entrusted them with. The Xandorians were determined to wipe out the last traces of the Valterran resistance, and if they succeeded, the galaxy would fall completely under their control. He took a deep breath, steadying his resolve. "We don't have to lead the rebellion. We just need to find the people who can." Lena studied him for a moment, then sighed. "All right. Let's say we find them. What's the plan then?" Ethan glanced at the map, then pointed to one of the red markers, a distant system on the outer edge of the galaxy. "This one," he said. "The Valterrans called it Zareth, an old moon in a system that's been mostly forgotten. According to the map, it's one of the largest resistance bases left." Lena frowned, leaning forward to examine the coordinates. "Zareth? I've heard of it. There were rumors that the resistance set up a hidden base there after the fall of the Valterran capital. But that was years ago. No one's heard anything from them since." "It's the best shot we've got," Ethan said. "If there's still a stronghold out there, we need to reach it before the Xandorians do." Lena was quiet for a moment, considering. Then she nodded. "All right. Zareth it is. But we have to be smart about this. The Xandorians won't stop looking for us, and if they find out we're heading for a resistance base, they'll throw everything they have at us." Ethan agreed, and with a flick of her hand, Lena keyed in the coordinates for Zareth. The ship lurched as it altered course, the stars outside the viewport shifting as they raced toward the distant system. As they traveled through the vast emptiness of space, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading into the unknown. The idea of finding the resistance felt like grasping at straws. What if Zareth had already fallen? What if the resistance had collapsed, and all they found were empty ruins and broken dreams? The thought was too heavy to dwell on. They had come this far, and whatever awaited them on Zareth, they would face it head-on. When they dropped out of hyperspace, the moon of Zareth hung in the distance, a dark, foreboding shape against the backdrop of the stars. It was a barren, rocky world, its surface scarred with deep craters and jagged mountain ranges. From orbit, it looked desolate, lifeless, a perfect place to hide if you didn't want to be found. Lena brought the ship into a low orbit, scanning for any signs of life. The console beeped as it picked up faint energy readings, deep below the moon's surface. "There's something down there," she said, tapping the screen. "Looks like underground structures. Could be a base." "Let's hope they're still friendly," Ethan muttered as they descended through the moon's thin atmosphere. The ship landed on a rocky plateau near the entrance of what appeared to be a vast underground cavern. The opening was large enough to conceal a starship, and judging by the faint energy readings, there was a hidden facility deep within. Ethan and Lena geared up quickly, readying their weapons and securing the orb in a protective case. As they stepped out of the ship, the eerie silence of Zareth pressed down on them. The only sounds were the crunch of their boots on the rocky ground and the faint whisper of the wind through the canyon. It felt like they were walking into a tomb. "Stay alert," Lena said, her voice low as they approached the cavern's entrance. "We don't know what's waiting for us." Ethan nodded, his hand resting on his blaster. They moved cautiously into the cavern, the walls narrowing around them as they descended deeper into the moon's surface. The energy readings grew stronger, and soon they found themselves standing before a massive set of reinforced doors, sealed tightly. "This must be it," Lena whispered, running her hand over the cold metal surface. "Looks like it's been locked down for a while." Ethan examined the door's control panel. It was old, but still functional. He pulled the orb from its case and held it up to the panel, hoping it might serve as a key. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft hum, the orb glowed brightly, and the doors slid open with a hiss of escaping air. Lena gave him a look. "Well, that's a good sign." They stepped inside. The chamber beyond the doors was vast, its ceiling disappearing into the darkness above. Rows of starships lined the walls, some of them battle-scarred and others in pristine condition. But it wasn't the ships that caught Ethan's attention, it was the people. Hundreds of figures stood waiting in the shadows, their eyes locked on the intruders. They were a ragtag mix of species, some humanoid, others more alien in appearance, but all of them shared the same worn, hardened look. These were fighters, survivors of a war that had taken everything from them. At the front of the crowd, a tall figure stepped forward, draped in a dark cloak. His skin was a deep blue, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. He regarded Ethan and Lena with cautious interest. "Who are you?" the figure asked, his voice deep and commanding. "And how did you find this place?" Ethan stepped forward, holding up the orb. "My name is Ethan Carrington. This is Sergeant Lena Reyes. We're here because of Vector." The mention of Vector's name sent a ripple through the crowd. The cloaked figure's eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer. "Vector? What do you know of him?" Ethan glanced at Lena, then back at the crowd. "He's dead. He gave me this before he died. He said it contained a message for the Resistance." The figure's expression darkened, but there was no surprise in his eyes, only sorrow. He reached out, and Ethan handed him the orb. The figure held it for a moment, his fingers tracing the surface as if he were feeling the weight of its significance. "Vector was our last commander," the figure said quietly. "He was the heart of the Resistance. Without him, we thought the fight was over." Ethan swallowed, unsure of what to say. He said the fight wasn't over. That the Valteran spirit lives on." The figure nodded slowly. "Perhaps he was right. But we are few, and the Xandorians are many. Even with this, I'm not sure we can defeat them." Lena stepped forward, her voice steady. You don't have to defeat them all at once. You just need to strike back, hit them where they least expect it. Show the galaxy that the resistance is still alive. The figure studied her for a long moment, then looked back at the crowd behind him. It's been a long time since we've had hope, he said quietly. But maybe you're right. Maybe it's time to rise again. He turned back to Ethan, his expression resolute. You've brought us something more than a message. You've brought us a spark. And if we're careful, we can use it to light the fire of rebellion. Ethan felt a strange mixture of relief and responsibility wash over him. He had carried Vector's message to the Resistance, but now that he was here, he realized that his role wasn't finished. The fight had only just begun. What do we do now? Ethan asked. The figure smiled grimly, his eyes glowing with determination. We regroup. We call out to the other cells, let them know the time has come. The Xandorians think they've broken us, but they're wrong. We've been in the shadows for too long. Now, we fight. Ethan nodded, feeling a surge of adrenaline. He had gone from being a simple soldier on a forgotten outpost to standing at the heart of a rebellion that could change the course of the galaxy. The figure turned back to the crowd, raising the orb high above his head. The Valteran spirit lives, he shouted. The crowd roared in response, their voices echoing through the cavern like thunder. Ethan stood among them, the weight of the galaxy on his shoulders, but for the first time, he didn't feel alone. The rebellion had begun, and together, they would strike back against the Empire. The spark of hope had been lit. Now, it was time to turn it into a wildfire.